All right, good evening, everybody. Appreciate everyone being here this evening. We are in our class of evidences, and we're starting a new section of class which is called the objective arguments. We talked about several subjective arguments that Christianity makes emotional sense. We talked about how there's meaning, identity, morality, and hope in this idea of Christianity. Now we're moving more towards intellectual data or objective findings, objective arguments that Christianity makes intellectual sense. And it seems logical to start with the idea of the existence of God. Now, what are some of the causes of skepticism that we've talked about over the last several weeks? Why would somebody become a skeptic? I'm sorry? Bad religious experience. Yeah, it kind of left their a sour taste in their mouth. Yeah, what else? Sorry? Peer pressure. Yeah, different voices that are speaking to them. Professors, friends, girlfriends, boyfriends, wives, husbands, those type of things. Yeah, what else? Yeah, desire to sin. They're justifying maybe a sin that they are wanting to proceed with, and they're saying, you know what, I'm just not going to believe in God at all. So those are kind of the big three that we talked about throughout the first several classes. Tonight, we're going to talk about the existence of God, and there's some opening observations that I want us to consider before we start looking at the evidence. We need to define who God is. We need to understand that all worldviews require faith. And then I think it's reasonable to ask this question, why doesn't he just tell us who he is? So let's first look at this idea of defining God. I think it's really important to start here. We have to define God, or we have to define what we mean by God if we're going to talk about God. Because different people have different conceptions or definitions of who God is. So this evening, we are going to talk about a theistic God. Not an atheistic, but a theistic God. A theistic God is a being who is beyond the world, who created and sustains the world. This apologist, Frank Turek, which does really good work, highly recommend his writings, his YouTube stuff. I'll also lean on Timothy Keller. He has a really good book called The Reason for God, which both of those books are fantastic. Turek states that a theistic God is a being who is beyond the world, who created and sustains the world, a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things, and whose every attribute is infinite. So it's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator. And I think it's also helpful for us to understand three main worldviews today. Because you can pretty much put most world religions into one of these three worldviews. The first one is theism. And that's what we're talking about tonight. For lack of a better way to describe this is God seeing him as the God who made all the stuff. Turek states that God is like a painter. He says it a lot better than I do. I mean, I'm just from Arkansas. God made all the stuff sounds a lot better than saying God is like a painter. I'm just kidding. But no, Turek states that God is like a painter. And the creation is his painting, and his attributes can be seen in his painting. But he's not the painting himself. And the three major religions in the world that ascribe to this belief would be Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Now, pantheism is God is the stuff. He is the painting, as we just described. And the painting has always existed, and God is the sky, and God is the trees, and God is this podium, and God is this water bottle, and God is this clicketizer. He's everything. Major religions that fall into this category are Hinduism, Buddhism, and New Age religions like pagan mysticism, those type of things. And then there's atheism. Stuff is all there is. There is no painter. What we see, it's not even a painting. It's a chance arrangement of molecules over billions of years of evolution. Simply, it's just a cosmic accident. So that's what we're dealing with defining God. A spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator. We also have to talk about this idea that all worldviews require faith. Everyone relies on faith every day. Faith fills the gap between evidence and 100% proof. Everyone thinks that faith is what you need when you have no evidence. That's what typically people would say in the world. Faith is just for religious people. You may have heard people say that to you. But the truth is, everybody relies on faith. All the time. Every single day. And that's because faith fills the gaps between evidence and 100% proof. Let me show you this scenario. This is not mine. This is one of my friends who's a preacher in Florida. Scenario 1. My wife would never cheat on me. So here's the problem with that scenario. There's no way to prove that with 100% proof. Because that's something in the future, and you haven't been there. So you don't actually know that your wife will not cheat on you. But you have the faith that she won't. Well, why is that? It's not because of blind faith that you have that belief. It's faith that's based on solid evidence. Evidence like her character, or her faithfulness to you so far, or her vows that she made before God, and to stay faithful to you forever. Or maybe even her religious belief that adultery would be dishonoring God and obviously dishonoring you, and she would never commit that sin against you, especially against God. So that's a good amount of evidence. Maybe even her family history of marriages lasting for years on years on years with her grandparents and her parents. That would serve as evidence. So in this case, the gap between the evidence and the proof is what? Really small. Which means the amount of faith I need to believe in this is very small too. So you don't need a whole lot of faith to get you to that proof. The more evidence you have, the less faith is required. Now let's go to another scenario. Scenario 2. I'm going to get a second date. Where's Wilson? Where's Wilson? Where'd he go? He was just here. I just saw him. Anyway, I was going to pick on Wilson. We'll just go ahead and still pick on him. This is Wilson's scenario. Not mine, obviously. I'm going to get a second date. After the first one. Again, that's not something after the first date that I can prove will happen, because why? It's future. And I can't prove it with 100% certainty, right? However, in poor Wilson's situation, the evidence may be pretty slim that the second date is actually going to happen. Things didn't go well for this guy. He wasn't connecting. She wasn't laughing at any of his jokes. He had really bad breath. She didn't really seem to enjoy herself at all. She kept looking at her watch, like, when is this ever going to end? She faked an illness at the end of her date. It's like that kind of thing. How's it going for him? Probably not going very well for him, right? He can't prove it with 100% certainty that a second date will happen, right? There's not a whole lot of evidence to suggest that it will actually happen, right? because it's not going very well. And so it will require a ton of faith to get to that certainty to say, hey, I'm going to get that second date. In order to believe that it's going to happen. Because the gap between evidence and proof is huge. Which means I'll need much more faith to believe that I'll get that second date, or that Wilson will get that second date. And that faith is much more blind and unreasonable. Because the evidence is what? So small. He doesn't have a lot of evidence to suggest that he's going to get that second date. The less evidence there is, the more faith is required. Think about that. The less evidence there is, the more faith is required. All things past and future require faith. We have faith that we won't get struck by lightning when we walk outside. We have faith that everyone will stop when the light turns red. We have faith that people can navigate a roundabout correctly. Oh, wait. Yeah, people can't really do that in Bowling Green. We have faith that George Washington was real. All these things, past and future, are based on reasonable evidence. Now let's look at scenario 3. Christianity is real and God is real. Whether you believe in God or you are a pantheist or an atheist like we described earlier, none of these worldviews, including a theist, none of these worldviews can be 100% proven for a fact. Why? Because none of us was there at the beginning of creation. None of us lived during Bible times. We didn't see it with our own eyes. And since none of them can be 100% proven, what do we need? What does the Bible say we need if we can't 100% prove it? We need faith. You need faith in whichever one you believe in, regardless of which one you believe in. And what we see is that the gap between evidence for the existence of God and the proof of his existence is extremely small compared to the gaps between atheism, in which you need far more faith to be an atheist than to be a believer in God. Anybody have any comments or questions on that? Yeah?
Christopher Columbus made the assumption when he came to the New World that these people were heathen because there was no church structure buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And he made that assumption. And of course, there were people that were in pagan religions,
Mm-hmm.
that human sacrifice and such like that, the Aztecs and such. There is a book with Eternity on Their Hearts.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty old book. And some missionaries have made some observations that throughout the world, not everywhere throughout the world, but in a lot of jungles and a lot of areas that you would be surprised, there was people who knew about the true God. There was people who knew about the law of Moses.
Yeah.
There was people who knew about Jesus Christ. And we're talking about remote areas without communication. And for example, there's a tribe in South America on the first day of the week, they partake of something like the Lord's Supper.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about the Son of God died, nailed to a tree,
Mm-hmm.
and they talk about baptism.
Yeah.
They have no church building. They don't have any structure like
Mhm.
that. They meet outdoors. Is that true Christianity? They talk about the Son of God. And he said a man named Thomas came and told them about it, and over around 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
So, people don't, and the thing is, you get these people who say, the college professors who say, oh, see, there's all these jungle tribes and they don't look down deep.
Yeah.
Whereas these missionaries have looked down deep and talked to these people and come to find out these people do have knowledge. Not all areas do, but a lot of areas do have knowledge of God.
Yeah.
And they completely discount that because they don't have the formal church building structure.
Yeah, and it kind of leads into my next point. Why doesn't God show up to every person as proof? Why doesn't he just give us 100% proof? Why do we need to even examine evidence for God's existence if he wants everyone to believe? I want us to think about this question. Let's have some dialogue on it. Why do you think God doesn't just make his existence obvious and clear by appearing to everyone personally? Yeah. What do you mean by that?
Moses had his view concealed when God walked by.
Yeah.
Too much.
Yeah, exactly. And the people of Israel couldn't handle the presence of God. And God just showed to Moses? His back. Couldn't handle seeing this amazing God. Yes, sir, Mr. McCurdy.
So, a couple of things there. One, why should we? Based on what he's already done for us. And then two, it worked the first time around. He's already done it. He's come to earth and shown us, and there are people who still reject it.
Yeah. He came down as man. He showed himself. His glory was revealed to man, as humanity. And what happened to that? He was murdered. That's what happened when he showed himself to man. Why else? Yes, ma'am. Ooh. Yeah, I think that's 100% accurate. The idea of free will. Where does free will go? If God just programs us to know who He is and uses our minds as robots and kind of takes over our minds. You kind of see this idea in Acts 17. In this beautiful sermon by Paul, he's preaching to pagans. And he's in the Areopagus there in Athens. And he says, "The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward Him and find Him. Yet He is actually not far from each one of us." What was Paul's conversion story? What happened to him? He was blinded. He had to seek God. He had to feel his way towards God, towards Him, and find Him. And he realized that God was actually not that far away from him. That's why God doesn't express Himself completely to us. We're not robots. We have free will. He wants us fully dedicated to Him, and that's based off of our searching and seeking Him. What does Hebrews 11:6 say? That He is a rewarder of those who what? Diligently seek Him. So this is what it's all about. This is why God doesn't just show up and give us this proof. Now you may have somebody say this. You may have said this. You may have heard somebody say this. I can't believe unless I find at least one absolutely airtight proof for God. Anybody heard that? Anybody said that to them? Anybody said that themselves? There is no airtight proof for God's existence. But we can look at the evidence. Look at the lines of reasoning for a God who is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent, a creator who created all things and sustains all things. And we can feel our way towards Him. And we can find Him, as Paul so brilliantly stated in that sermon in Athens that we just talked about. And then rather than seeing these as proofs, I think it's more helpful for us to look at these more like clues.
Man, this is some of that emotionally based too. Because what's airtight proof for me may not be airtight proof for someone else.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's not a proof. I think it's more of a clue. And that's kind of how Timothy Keller in his book kind of expresses this idea, that these are clues for God. They are strong clues for His reality. They're divine fingerprints for His existence. And when you see the cumulative weight and the effect of these clues of God, the faith bridge between evidence and certainty is fairly small. The three divine fingerprints that I want us to talk about this evening relatively quickly is the beginning, meaning if the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. The design, if there's design in the universe and design in you, there must be a designer And then 3, we've already talked about this a little bit, so we won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but this idea of morality. If there's one thing morally wrong out there, then there has to be a God. So we'll kind of unpack those. Anybody have any questions, comments? Everybody tracking? Everybody good? Everybody awake? Busy day today. So let's go through the first one, the beginning. If there is a beginning, there must be a beginner. Generally speaking, most scientists today believe that the world had a beginning. Now, past science believed that there was not a beginning and that it always existed, but through scientific advances, most people today would believe that there's a beginning. Where do scientists turn to suggest where the beginning began? Most scientists. Yeah, the Big Bang Theory. Yeah, exactly. A spontaneous eruption of matter, the Big Bang Theory. Stephen Hawking believes that almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. So even he, probably the most famous physicist of our time, admits that space, time, and matter had a beginning out of what? Nothing. Space, time, and matter had a beginning out of nothing. Now he tries to come up with another explanation as to why or how this happened other than God, but nonetheless, he's admitting the data. He's admitting that space, time, and matter had a beginning out of nothing. So the next logical question that you may ask is, well, if there's a beginning to our universe, then something has caused the beginning of the world, or if nothing has caused the beginning of the world. So everything we know in this world as contingent, meaning it is dependent or influenced by something else, has a cause outside of itself. Nothing cannot cause what we see around us to exist. Nobody has ever observed anything existing spontaneously. Eggs come from chickens, right? They don't magically appear. No one in this room right now is really concerned about a tiger just dropping right next to me and eating me alive, right? That doesn't happen. Nothing by nothing and eating me alive really doesn't happen. The same can be said if you're hungry right now. Let's say, where would we want to get some food? Where would we want to get some food? Chick-fil-A. Okay. So let's say we want to go get some Chick-fil-A. Would it make any sense to just sit here and wait and hope that Chick-fil-A just pops out of existence, out of nothing by nothing, without a cause? Or are you going to actually call them and get Uber Eats to come to your house, or DoorDash, or however they do it these days, to come and bring it to you, right? You're going to actually do something about it. You can never get anything from nothing. If you could, why don't we see this still happening today? If the universe came from nothing, why don't we see Teslas or new stores popping up into existence from nothing? Even an atheist believes that something caused the universe to come into existence. They say it was the Big Bang, but something had to make the Big Bang happen. But what? Something or somebody that transcends everything. Now we go back to our definition of who God is, this theistic God, a being that is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, this intelligent creator. This is where it comes from. And we see that the biblical narrative perfectly, well, let's read this first. We have this very solid conclusion that the universe had an origin, the Big Bang. Now, we don't agree with that. But just keep going with this. 15 billion years ago, the universe began with an unimaginably bright flash of energy with a very small point. I have trouble saying that word. That implies that before that, there was nothing. I can't imagine how nature, in this case the universe, could have created itself. And that the very fact that the universe had a beginning implies that someone was able to begin it. And it seems to me that that had to be outside of nature. This is a scientist saying this. yielding this idea that something certainly came from nothing, but it came from a higher power than them. Look at what Genesis 1:1 says. Certainly lines up with the biblical narrative. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Something from nothing. Job 38, when he's having this dialogue with God, questioning everything. Obviously, he's gone through a whole lot in his life. Job 38 and verse 4 says, this is God speaking, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk, or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy." Any comments or questions off that? Make sense? We're tracking? We're good? Any comments? All right, so let's go to this idea of there being a design. For organic life to exist, the fundamental regularities and constants of physics, like speed of light, the gravitational constant, strength of weak and strong nuclear forces, must have values that together fall into an extremely narrow range. Now, this apologist kind of set all this idea in motion when he talked about how if you found a watch in the woods, would you think that it was made by natural law? That idea is, if you found this beautiful watch in the woods, do you think that time created that? Do you think wind created that? Do you think rain created that thing? Well, no, of course not. You wouldn't think that. You would think if there's a watch, then there's got to be a watchmaker. And so this idea of things falling into a very extremely narrow range, there are certain aspects of our universe, such as constants of nature, laws of nature, that are so precisely designed that if we were to slightly differentiate any of those in either direction, there would be no universe. I think this suggests that if there's design in the universe and design in you, then there must be a designer. And this idea of this fine-tuning argument suggests that the universe was prepared for human beings. That's true, right? God created this beautiful, magnificent universe that we live in for us. We were the culmination of His creation on day 6. We'll talk about that here in a second. Look at this quote. Another scientist quote. "When you look from the perspective of the scientist at the universe, it looks as if it knew we were coming. There are 15 constants, the gravitational constant, various constants about the strong and weak nuclear forces, etc. They have precise values. If any one of those constants was off by even 1 part in a million, or in some cases by 1 part in a million, the universe could not have actually come to the point where we see it. Matter would not have been able to coalesce. There would have been no galaxy, stars, planets, or people. These are the initial conditions of the universe. There wasn't time for these conditions to evolve. And some have said that it's as if there were a large number of dials that all had to be tuned into within this very extremely narrow limit. That the universe in which we live in was prepared for human beings, which it was. It's extremely unlikely that all these narrow limits were by mere chance. I just don't really have enough faith to believe in chance. By the way, what do people typically mean when they say chance? There's an idea of mathematical chance, but there's data to back that up. They don't have the data to back up their idea of chance. What do you think they mean when they say chance? Huh? Yeah, luck. Yeah. They don't know. I think that's what they're saying. It's a scientific way of saying, I don't know. There's not a force out there known as chance that causes all these things. to happen. Really, the only thing that's left to explain the way our universe exists is that it was designed to be right here. And that seems to be the best explanation. The same being that created the universe is the same being that's created all these constants to let things work the way that they work, such as gravitational force. Let's see. And we see that throughout creation. Conditions of the universe are just right. They're on a razor's edge. And you can make the argument that even our solar system is designed with us in mind. If we're just a little bit closer to the sun, what happens? If we're a little bit further away from the sun, what happens? We freeze, yeah. So this is what the scientists would say is this Goldilocks theory, or the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's what? Just right, yeah.
So if we were to say that this hymn book came out of a printing press that exploded, it'd be the exact same thing, that all these words are in the exact way that makes sense. That's exactly what they're saying. That would make sense.
That takes a lot of faith to take that on, right? To say that that happened that way, correct? Yeah, very good analogy there. Yeah?
It's also very interesting with the eclipse on Monday.
Yeah.
Where, by coincidence, the sun is exactly where it's at, the moon exactly the distance it's at for it to be able to align like it does for the eclipse. And it's like,
Yeah, the predictability of that eclipse, we know that the next eclipse is going to happen whenever it is, at this specific time, by the second. So we know the future, what's going to happen in the future, barring God, the second coming of Christ, obviously. Yeah, exactly right. I have a slide for that. It's kind of funny here in a second. Any other comments? So, got to catch up to my clicker. Let's look at the oxygen levels in our atmosphere. Right now, in this room, it's 21%. If it's 15%, what happens? We suffocate. If it's 25%, all these spontaneous fires would just break out in this room. Very, very narrow. And then we see all these natural laws that are actually I have this one too. Jupiter's gravitational force and size. So the place in which Jupiter is in our solar system protects the Earth. Because of its size and the gravitational pull that it has, all the space junk and meteors are hit on Jupiter. And you can see these scars on Jupiter that are the size of Earth. We would be annihilated if that didn't happen. That this gravitational pull of Jupiter would just pull this stuff and obviously we would be destroyed. Natural laws, they're pretty certain that these are going to happen. If you leave a hot cup of coffee on the table for a couple minutes, what will happen? It'll cool off. What about gravity? Gravity is something we can really rely on, right? What happens if you jump off a building without a parachute? You'll figure out what gravity is really quick. It's unchanging. Each day has 24 hours in it. Days don't become longer in hours. It's something that has been very constant. The speed of light remains the same. These natural laws are precise and reliable, which point us to a created force, which is God. The designs of our human bodies, I don't think this is in your notes. It's something I thought of today. Our bodies can only exist in very extremely narrow ranges. For example, our potassium levels. The normal therapeutic range of your potassium in your body, circulating your body, should be 3.5 to 5.1 millimoles per liter. Any deviation off of that causes major problems, fatal arrhythmias of the heart. I've seen them personally. I've seen a patient who came in with a potassium level of 6. So just barely off the upper limit of normal. And the patient died because she went into an abnormal rhythm. When I see this rhythm, I'm calling Dr. McCurdy to figure out what's going on because this is inevitably going to happen. That's not good. In medicine, that's called flatlining, which isn't good. But that's one example of the very, very narrow range for us to exist. How about this one? Our pH levels of our blood. We see this many times, how if we check a blood gas, which kind of describes the idea of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the blood, you can see how acidic or basic your blood is. And if you're not in this very thin range, 7.35 to 7.45, you can have fatal, catastrophic events that can happen because you're either a little too acidic or you're a little basic. Pretty crazy. I actually ordered 2 of these right before I came here. Here it is. I thought this was funny. You see the lunar eclipse there. You see the solar eclipse. Then you see an apocalypse. I thought that was funny. If the sun was that close to the earth, we would all fry, just like we talked about earlier. You see this in nature, and you see this in the biblical narrative. Look at Romans chapter 1. Once again, Paul describing the same type of thing. Romans chapter 1. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made, so that they are without excuse. Look at Psalm 19, verse 1. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. Look at Isaiah 40, verse 25 through 26. To whom will you compare me? Or who is my equal, says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? Who brings out the starry hosts one by one and calls forth, each of them by name? Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. I think that these verses give us immense amount of faith to believe that God is watching over us, that God is taking care of us, that God sees us as people who he wants, that he wants us to be his. I think this is very powerful for us to look in creation. I mean, that was amazing on Monday. That was fantastic. And all I could think about was, this is just a display of how magnificent, how majestic God was. And think about this. So much of our United States just paused they spent thousands of dollars to do this. I mean, crazy amounts of money to see this. That's incredible. That God can display his might and power. I'm so glad that we were able to kind of have that kind of correlate with our class right now on this section. Anybody have any questions, comments? What are some clues that you see in design or in beginnings that you would say has really affected your faith? Yeah.
If you zoom into something that's man-made, like with a microscope, the closer you get, the more rough it becomes and less detailed. But when you take something that God has made, the more closely you look at it, the more detailed it becomes.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. What else? That's why I love working in medicine. I mean, I see it all the time. I see it displayed in many instances, especially that narrow range in which human life can live. I think about that often, that very small changes in a human body can really be catastrophic. And I really wonder how we're all staying alive. I'm just kidding. No. Yep, what's up?
You kind of touched on this with the range that you're talking about, but there's this concept called irreducible complexity that is used in a lot of ecologist arguments. And there are so many systems throughout the human body that you cannot reduce the complexity of them without them breaking down.
Yeah.
If you don't have all the amino acids and proteins necessary for that, who would we have? If you didn't have every single one exactly as they should be, the human race would die in one generation because we wouldn't be able to heal from wounds. You need systems like that in place all at once. We don't have time for evolution to figure out things or sight. We have to have them from the moment we're created.
Yeah, that's a great point. Dr. Emery, you remember the coagulation cascade? I mean, it's like all these certain things that happen, and it just blows your mind that all that happens. Any other comments, questions? Yeah.
I think just the way that like DNA works. I took a bio class last semester, and I probably didn't go like half the classes, but the ones I did
Good, good, good.
The ones I did go to talk about DNA.
Full disclosure.
Wild to me, like how this is the code that builds humans. And
Yeah.
He was a self-proclaimed atheist too, which I was like, bro, you're saying you're talking about DNA.
I know.
Claiming atheist is like weird.
Yeah. Four different letters can cause all those different combinations, and how these big old proteins come in and transcribe it and translate it. Like, it's unbelievable. Yeah. Saw another hand. Yes, ma'am.
So Golden ratio is really cool to have that.
Okay.
It's like learning about it as a music teacher.
Okay.
It has so many compositions, and it's just like all these great pieces of art, but you also see it in shells and all of these like natural things in mathematics, and I'm not a math major, but it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And you kind of bring up this idea of music too. Like this idea of beauty being in music, or beauty being in art, or beauty being in a sky. Like those things certainly convince you of the existence of God. When you can define what beauty is and you can see it. Any other comments? Yes, sir.
There's an analogy I heard years ago, and it's always stood out to me. You know, if we had a 1,000-piece puzzle, just stood here and threw it up in the air, you know, we know that those pieces are just going to fall to the ground, scramble. They're not going to put themselves together. We could do that for 1 million years, and it would do the same thing. It would never put itself together. There has to be a designer to tend to those details, to put it together, to make it work. And like you were saying earlier, it requires so much more faith to believe something like that, even on a larger scale, you know, much larger scale.
Yeah, creating a human being.
Yeah.
I mean, that's way bigger than a puzzle.
Right, than to believe that there's a designer that created all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Gary.
I was just going to piggyback off of Gary and jump back to the Big Bang Theory. So, like, there's no example, you know, in history that we have of something coming from nothing
Mm-hmm.
that I know of. So, I mean,
Other than the beginning, Genesis. Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, we don't have an example. We haven't witnessed anything, something coming from nothing and just being there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good point. Yes, sir.
One thing that kind of blew my mind when I was learning about how people were created in the womb,
Yeah.
and how we're all created, every single person in here, and how we started out with one cell, and that cell separated,
Yeah.
and that cell separated, and that cell separated, and as these cells separated, they magically somehow knew exactly where to go to form each part of our body,
Yeah.
our limbs, our legs, our limbs, everything. And I was thinking about scripture with those things, and like, in the beginning, what was God doing in Genesis? He was separating.
Yeah.
He was making things
It's
holy.
true.
And throughout the whole scripture, what is he doing when he separates? He's making things holy. And
Yeah.
it makes me think, like, as he creates each one of us, he is making us like a part of him. Like, he is
That's good.
separating us into like the perfect of like separation of making us holy, making
Yeah.
us in his image.
In his image, yeah, that goes right back to that. Let's finish up this class. The idea of morality. Where does morality come from? Consideration morality. When I say moral, it's an orientation towards understandings about what is right and wrong, just and unjust, that they are not established by our own actual desires or preferences, but instead are believed to exist apart from them, providing standards by which our desires and preferences can themselves be judged. In other words, all human beings have moral feelings, or what we would describe as a conscience. When we consider when we consider doing something that we feel would be wrong, we tend to refrain from that. Our moral sense of obligation does really not stop there. This idea of moral obligation is a belief that some things ought not to be done, regardless of how a person feels about them within themselves, regardless of what the rest of our social construct or community or our culture says. We talked about morality for a whole class earlier, but I appreciate your comments. I appreciate talking about God in this way. It's very faith-building. I appreciate everyone here this evening. Thank you.